Coming up next is The World of Work, and I'm your host, Shep Cohen.
You work in the factory all of your life. Try to provide for your kids and your wife. When you get too old to produce anymore, they hand you your hat and they show you the door. And you're too old to work, too old to work. When you're too old to work, you're too young to die. Who will take care of you while you get by when you're too old to work and you're too young to die? You don't ask for favors when your life is through. You've got a right to what's coming to you. Your boss gets a pension when he is too old. You helped him retire, you're out in the cold. And you're too old to work, too old to work. When you're too old to work and you're too young to die. Take care of you while you get by when you.
This is The World of Work, and I'm your host, Shep Cohen. Our guest today is my wife of 43 years, Sharon Mark Cohen. She's here today celebrating our 43rd anniversary. As a seasoned genealogist, Sharon has collected data on over 3,000 family members and kept up communications with a variety of relatives around the world. Sparked with energy and enthusiasm, she regularly lectures on her genealogy findings. Numerous publications in multiple states have accepted her stories or written about her work. Our house has been likened to a museum, and she's been called a detective when it comes to finding relatives. Sharon, a contributing writer at the Jewish Link, is a people person and born storyteller who believes that everyone is entitled to a legacy. Sharon has been acknowledged by 2 authors in their recently published books and is looking forward to the publication of her family history book. Sharon Mark Cohen, thank you for 43 great years, and welcome back to The World of Work.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for having me for 43 years. It's been wonderful, and with the weather today, it made me think of our wedding day on June 15th, 1975, when my brother said to me that morning, "I just want you to know, because you probably won't think about this, but it's a 10 weather day. It's absolutely gorgeous out today." And I thought of that today as we were driving in. The weather is just beautiful today.
Beautiful, yes, it is. It is. A little bit of traffic driving here, but other than that,
that was a little frightening
nice.
With the traffic jam. We didn't know we were going to make it in time.
But we did. Otherwise, Tom would have filled in for us till we got here. But we're here, and you've been working really hard the last few weeks or last few months, but you finally accomplished getting one of the family newsletters out. Tell us a little bit about that family newsletter and what it includes and when you started it.
Okay, I will. But first I want to congratulate Shep on the air for his most recent honor last Sunday. Speaking about being busy with things, last Sunday we were at the annual Essex West Hudson Labor Council of the AFL-CIO breakfast, and Shep was honored there for his commitment to the community service and continued support of the labor movement. And we were there in the company of Senator Menendez and Congressman Payne and others who were on hand to address the crowd. So it was really a wonderful event.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was a real honor. I was very happy to get that award, and it was very nice. And you were there, of course, and your brothers were there, and my secretary. So we had a really nice client salon. We were a really nice morning.
It really was. It was great. Your speech was wonderful, and all the cheers from the people in attendance. It was really great.
Thank you.
On to my newsletters. My newsletters become my diary. What happened was I first put together our family trees on all sides of my parents and your parents in the late 90s, the 1990s. And then in 2000, after I distributed all those family trees with all the information that I had, people's names, dates and places of birth, and whatnot, their marriages and everything, I decided that I needed to continue a record of everybody and where they were and what was happening. And so it became my diary, writing the newsletter, which I did consecutively every year for over a dozen years. It was therapeutic to see what was happening with everybody in the family and all the new people I connected with, and finding old information. One of the things that I loved finding was old signatures, old autographs. People in the family signed wills, they signed documents, they signed marriage certificates, they signed many different things. They signed cards to us, wedding cards, engagement cards, wedding cards, graduation cards, and I had all these signatures, and I put them together and put them on a page in the newsletter so everybody could see the signatures of grandparents, parents, siblings, whatnot. And that's something we're missing now with
social
emails.
media, yeah.
Social media. No handwritten letters. I sent a handwritten thank you note to a cousin in Florida a few years ago, and she called me up crying. She said she was crying when she got it. She hadn't seen a handwritten note in years. So it's something that's...
It is special. I know they say that if you went for a job interview, it might be a nice way to respond and say your thank you for the interview, to send a handwritten note rather than just an email.
I know our daughter always does that.
Yes, she's the one who and it's been successful for her.
Yep. It's a good idea to go back to at least signing your name on cards. I really told someone who sent an email thank you for an event they had, and I said, it's really not right. You should teach I told the mother, you should teach the children to write out thank yous. And it's something that can serve you well in life.
So getting back to your newsletters, how did it expand from a newsletter to a news book almost?
Right. The one that I sent out just yesterday, finally, after working on it, I don't know how many months, maybe 6 months, I lagged for 2.5 years. I hadn't worked on them. After doing them consecutively each year, I stopped. The last 2.5 years, I just couldn't find the time between working on my own book and decorating and doing editing for other people and many other things that I was involved with, including planning weddings. So I just got back to it now. I knew the whole time that I was away from it that I would definitely get back to it, and I did. And I did the first branch. I did my father's side. And that was a 40-page newsletter that I emailed to 100 relatives yesterday around the world.
And what's it called?
Well, I call this the Temna Gorid Mishpacha newsletter. Temna Gorid was my grandmother's maiden name. And if we go back far enough, my grandparents were first cousins to one another on my father's side. If we go back far enough, the family name, as far back as we know, was Temna Gorid, which means dark city.
And what does Mishpacha mean?
Mishpacha is the entire family. So I do it through family, and what I consider family is also people who are from Chudnov, which was the shtetl in the Ukraine where my father was born. Chudnov, Ukraine. He was born there in 1911 and came to America in 1912. So his father came first and left my grandmother pregnant with him and with my uncle there, and then they came over in 1912.
It's a funny story with your father's birthday. Why don't you tell us that?
That was a funny story. My father, we always celebrated his birthday in January, and somewhere along the line, I think it was probably in the 50s, maybe 60s, that he became a citizen, and my aunt looked for documents for him to become a citizen and found out that he was actually born on Valentine's Day, on February 14th, 1911. When some of my cousins came to live in America as recently as the 1990s, they brought documents, and it was their father, my father's first cousin, my grandmother's nephew, who was born in the same shtetl in Chudnov, Ukraine, in January of 1911. So my grandmother probably just wasn't sure, her nephew's birthday or her son's birthday. She remembered they were born sometime that year, but
so keeping in touch with the family
can get you some
get you
real dates.
some good information. So your father had to celebrate his birthday on the right date from then on.
Mm-hmm. So in my newsletter, I I talked about why I didn't do the newsletters for 2.5 years, that we had home repairs, we had a new kitchen, we had graduations, and we had our children were having graduations in Cleveland and in New York, and we were back and forth with those a few times.
And New York again.
And then we had, right, and Cleveland again, and New York again, and back and forth. And also we had, I was copying our videotapes.
And why'd you do that?
Many years ago.
Why'd you do that?
I was putting them onto DVDs, but there's a little snag there, and I have to figure out exactly how to get this right. I have a machine that puts them on, but apparently you can only watch them on that machine, so I have to find another way and do it again, which isn't a bad thing because I enjoyed watching them finally after having them stored all these years, and I finally took them out and watched them. And one of the videos I came upon, especially exciting, was our son, our older son, Judd, just married in November and moved out to Portland, Oregon. And out there are two of his first cousins living there over 15 years. And one of them, his male cousin, taught him how to ice skate when Judd was about 4 years old. And we have a video of him teaching him how to ice skate at the ice skating rink in Warnanko Park, which was near where we grew up and the park that we went to and ice skated at.
That's in the Elizabeth, Roselle, Linden area.
Right. It's in
Union County.
Mainly in the Roselle side, but of course everybody from Elizabeth thinks it's the Elizabeth Park.
Well, of course, I'm from Elizabeth.
Well, I'm from Roselle, so it's mainly in Roselle. And my uncle's...
No, I understand it's mainly in Elizabeth.
My uncle helped start the park. He was a tree trimmer when he was a young teenager, trimming the trees to get the park started. So we have a long history at Warnanko Park, and a lot of that is in my book, which hopefully you'll get to read someday.
Not hopefully. We will.
Oh, I like that.
So tell us about, we went to an out-of-town wedding, which kept you busy, unable to get to the newsletter. Tell us about the wedding in Savannah and why, as a genealogist, it's important to do things like that when others might not want to go to a wedding like that.
That's right. We've been to Savannah on day trips from Fripp Island many times. I think the listeners know that every year for a long time we would go to Fripp Island, to family's place there on our winter vacation, and we would take a day traveling to Charleston and a day traveling to Savannah. So we've been to Savannah many times, but we never really vacationed in Savannah. And this time we had a family wedding, a destination wedding for them as well. They're not from Savannah, they're from here. And we went down and got to spend days with family. Just like at our son's wedding in November, we were in Cleveland for his wedding, and we got to spend days at the hotel with members of the family. And one of my cousins, who we saw last week in Allentown, Pennsylvania, at his son's graduation from high school party, said to me at the time, he said, "This is the most fun I've had in years. Just being together with us, with me, my brothers, with my first cousins." He's a more distantly related cousin, but yet we were all very close, and he spent family vacations when he was growing up with my aunt and uncle, his parents, my aunt and uncle, and their children.
He's somewhat of a celebrity, having appeared on the World of Work in the past. And how about the family reunions we've gone to? What role do they play in your research and your...
So one thing I have to say, it's so funny. It's really hilarious. Sometimes we'll leave a reunion or a gathering with some relatives, and we'll get in the car or wherever, and we'll start talking about it. And for a minute, we'll have to think about it. Was it my side or was it your side? We both feel so close with all these people that we meet, all these different relatives, and we just have such a good time talking about everything and anything that we forget sometimes who's the relative.
And it's vice versa on their side too. They say, is Sharon or Shep the cousin?
Right. And yeah, it's very true. And a lot of times they address me as the cousin simply because I'm the genealogist. I'm the one that does all the work to find them and get together and everything. So they think that I'm the cousin. But a lot of times it'll be, well, actually, Shep's the relative, but I'm the relative by marriage. And
And often when we're driving back from a reunion or flying back from a reunion, it sparks your creative juices to write an article. How does that
Absolutely.
happen?
Absolutely, it just does. I mean, you just start thinking about the different connections and whatnot, and that's the way I operate with my writing. I just have to spark a creative juice, and I just go right to the computer. And even the other day with the newsletters, I thought of something, and I woke up early in the morning, and before anything, I had to run down to the computer and type in my thought, so I wouldn't forget what I wanted to write about, and then give myself a brief outline of what I was going to write about to put together a story. And that's the way I do it for writing for the newspaper and everything. I just, like, when the juice hits and I get this creative thought, I just write it down at that time. I don't have a preferred time to write. It's not like I like to write early in the morning or I like to write late at night. Some people have a time that they want to write. That's not the way my mind does it. The way I do it is whenever the thought hits, that's when I have to put down the notes and write about it.
As a result of the approximately 3,000 cousin relatives that you've uncovered, you have friends now around the whole world. Tell us a little bit about when I say friends, your relatives.
The relatives.
Your relatives, and I call them friends because they've. When our daughter was in Israel a few years ago, the one name that everyone was able to pronounce and knew was Sharon.
Right. So that's very true. What happened was from doing the newsletters, everyone got to know who I was. And I try to include as many of them and as many of their interesting stories as I can in my newsletter. Not really stories, but facts, different things that, are happening. And in this particular newsletter, I have a lot of pictures from our son's engagement and his wedding. Now I have our daughter's engagement pictures, and her wedding is scheduled for next June, a year from now. So we'll have all that information to look forward to. I have different pictures of when Shep was honored, when he argued twice this term at the New Jersey Supreme Court, and we were there with him. And various topics that I come upon, like Just Who Are Our Cousins is one of the titles of one of the pages.
Yes.
And I have I copied the bio from our cousin Jenny, who came to this country when she was 8 years old. And she went right from Stuyvesant High School in New York to an 8-year program for college and medical school. Then she went to study the surgery for around the eyes, and she's now in practice in Connecticut. And it's just a beautiful thing that we never would have even known each other. If I hadn't done this family research and found them, we wouldn't have known that we existed. And now we dance together at her wedding. I was dancing with her saying, Jenny, can you believe it?
As accomplished as she is, probably getting into Stuyvesant High School in New York City, which is the best high school in the city and one of the best in the whole country, was quite an accomplishment for someone who only a few years before that was in Europe, and she was able to accomplish that.
It's really amazing stories like this that I love to put in the newsletter. And I love it when I get a call, like yesterday. I got a message from my cousin who is from the Ukraine, and he's from Kharkiv, Ukraine, and he's now living in Germany. And he got his master's, his MBA last year, this past winter,
Yes.
I guess it was. And he speaks with me on Skype every once in a while, fluent English. And he told me that he knows that he's the one that will be able to get any additional records from the Ukraine, because he speaks the language fluently. So he's now working alongside to try and get any missing details that we can from our ancestors. And it's an amazing thing. When he got the newsletter yesterday, I had in it pictures of 2 tombstones that I found on the internet, one with my grandmother's maiden name and one with my grandfather's last name, as it was in Europe. It was Moravina for the women, Moravin for the men. And in America, it is Mark. So he looked at them, he looked at the tombstones in his native language and told me he's not certain that they're related. He looked up other information about them based on what he read here on the tombstones. And now I'll be able to send this to the other relatives and fellow Chudnover members who may have more clues as to whether or not these are tombstones of our relatives.
Now, Sharon Mark Cohen, you talked about the internet, and that's very important in helping you do your family tree genealogy research. But you often say that doing it the old-fashioned way is still the key to your success in
In my
researching.
case, it definitely is.
And
Just
why is
having met the first person who was in the family who came here in 1990, and we met her in 1994 through my research. And when we met her, she gave me a family tree that a cousin in Russia had done. By that time, or soon after that, he was living in Israel. And he then did his memoir, and in it, he has all kinds of stories that match my stories and from that I heard growing up.
And how, and age-wise, is he?
He was much older. He was about 15 years older than I am. And so I'm able to take excerpts from his memoir and put them in my book. He was able to write about me in his book. And we were able to piece together all kinds of information about the family that lived in Russia or Ukraine and the family here in America.
And tell us a little bit about Chudnov, Ukraine. Just which family members came from there?
Just my father and his older brother and his parents on that tree. And then there were 4 more. My grandparents had 4 more children in America. But on cousins of theirs, when my grandfather first came, he settled with his cousin in Irvington and worked for a year and then brought over my grandmother and my uncle and my father. And so there was that branch of the family who we are very close with some of those descendants now. Always have known some of them and others I didn't know, but we've got in touch and we've been connected now for many years now through this research. I started my research in 1988, so it's been a long time that I've been in contact with a lot of them.
There's a funny story about our daughter-in-law Dina's grandfather has relatives in...
Right.
Where is that?
So his grandfather was born in Chudnov, Ukraine, and I found those records online. I'm a consummate researcher, and so I'm always looking, and I couldn't believe my eyes when I found that he was also from Chudnov, which is a small shtetl, only about 4,000 or 5,000 people. And it was remarkable that her grandfather's grandfather was born in Chudnov. They always knew him to be from another town, which was a few miles away from Chudnov, but that's probably where he grew up. But the records clearly stated that he was actually born, though, in Chudnov. And there's different spellings of Chudnov. We pronounce it Chudnov, but it's written Chudnow, sometimes with a W at the end, but it's Chudnov, the pronunciation of the W as a V.
Didn't you recently meet someone, I guess, at a graduation party we went to, who...
That was last week.
Yeah, who knows Dina's grandfather.
That family from St. Louis, right. Her grandparents lived in St. Louis all the years, and her grandfather, who has the grandfather who was from Chudnov,
Yes.
being from St. Louis, the people we were talking to at this graduation party in Allentown last week, well, actually, they were sitting behind the person I was speaking with and heard me mention about St. Louis, about another cousin of Shep's who lives out there. And they turned around and said, "Oh, we're from St. Louis." And then I immediately said, "Well, you must know such and such family." And they said, "Oh, yes, of course we do." So, small world. Here we go.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when you get that type of information, what do you do with it? Do you just put it in your memory bank, or do you write it down?
I immediately sent a text. Nowadays, with all the social media, I immediately sent a text or a WhatsApp to the family so they would know and the word would get out. And I have it down. But I put a lot of things like that in the newsletters, too. And it was fun yesterday. Our daughter got a message from a cousin who she stayed with when she was in Israel, talking about her wedding, because now she saw about the engagement and the date of the wedding in the newsletter and everything yesterday. So I immediately said to my daughter, invite her, and she did, and she said she's going to do her best to come for the wedding next year.
After you finish these newsletters, I know that you're thinking of a major overhaul of your family tree research. What type of work are you going to be doing?
So, for quite a while, my computer was acting up, and I wasn't keeping up with inputting the information into the family tree program on the computer. So I finally got a new computer this winter, and my brother came over and set it up for me. So I'm now, and then my son took the family tree that I had on the old computer and input it into the new one. So I'm now going to input everything that I have in the newsletters into the family tree programs, everybody's new address, phone numbers, contact information. And then I'm going to do a photo history to go along with it.
And how are you going to go about getting the pictures?
Well, I have so many pictures. There was one picture I just took. I found last week, and I took it and I sent the copy to a cousin in California, and it's my grandfather holding her father in 1940. And she said, I don't have any pictures from this era. Her father's still living. He lives out in Venice, California. And she was so excited to have that picture of her father as a baby in my grandfather's arms. It's just such a connecting piece to the puzzle. We're definitely related and we know it, but here's a connecting piece. Here's a picture of my grandfather holding her father as a baby. So there's no denying that we are cousins.
My cousin Jack, recently, his mother passed away, and he got all of her pictures, which he has, and he's trying to organize them some way. When we went to visit with him and look at the pictures, it was like we were in a candy store when little kids seeing all these pictures.
Well, it's interesting. For years, I asked his mother and everyone else in the family. In my newsletters, I always put notices, please send me your wedding picture, send me important pictures to put with the newsletter or to put with the family history, and got barely any pictures. And I understand it's difficult because we have so many pictures, you really don't know which one to use. But that's why I said a special occasion, a graduation, a wedding picture, something that you would want for your legacy to be permanent in this book. And now that his mother passed away, he has gazillion photos, and they were just what we were looking for all these years. We even have pictures of Shep's mother when she was a young girl.
A lot of the pictures, or most of them, are not labeled, so he had a hard time determining who it was and identifying who it was in the pictures.
So it was fun getting all those texts from him
yes,
along the way,
like
asking...
every night we'd get another text with,
who's this?
Who's this? Who's that?
But also, he bought a machine that can...
Scan?
It not only can it scan, but it can determine who the people in the pictures are, match up pictures of a person in one picture at one age and tell you that that's that person at another age. So you can identify some of the pictures. And he offered to do our pictures after he finishes with his. So we're probably going to take him up on that sometime soon.
And sometime soon we have to take a break. This is The World of Work. I'm your host, Shep Cohen, and we're talking genealogy, family tree, with my wife, Sharon Mark Cohen, this afternoon. We'll be back in a few minutes after these messages.
Mama don't allow no above-ground nuclear testing around here. Mama don't allow no above-ground nuclear testing around here. We don't care what Mama don't allow.
You're listening to WDVR 89.7 Delaware Township, New Jersey.
And this is The World of Work. I'm your host, Shep Cohen, and we're back on the air. My guest this afternoon is my wife, Sharon Mark Cohen, genealogist, and she's with me today on our 43rd wedding anniversary. And we've been talking about genealogy, and one of the major benefits of her life as a genealogist has been the ability to meet interesting cousins, and one person which I didn't want to forget about, so that's why I want to start right after this half-hour break, is cousin Lois. So Sharon, tell us about Lois and how she came into your life, and how she came into your life through the book that you've written.
Well, it's a funny thing. I knew my cousin Lois. I knew she existed. She's a little over 20 years my senior, but especially on Thanksgiving weekend every year, my mother would always say, "Oh, it's my niece Lois's birthday." But we didn't really see her until 1970. First time I met her out in Cleveland. She was living out there then. She had just come back from living in Japan, where her husband was a surgeon in the military. So we saw each other again. I think it was 20 years later. And then we saw each other again 20 years later. So we really didn't know each other. So when our son was in law school, or college in Cleveland, and then went back for law school, we got together with her each time we were out there. And she really didn't remember the other meetings. She didn't remember when we were there in 1970. She didn't remember when we were there in 89. But she remembered in childhood coming to New Jersey to Roselle and visiting, and coming with her mother on the train and visiting my grandfather and my mother and my mother's siblings, all her aunts and uncles. So then it was, I guess it was when he was in law school and we all got together. She had her daughter come in from Michigan to see us with her daughter. And the only other time I met her daughter was in 1970, when I was 16 at the time, or 16 or 17. She was a year younger than me. And she didn't remember it either. It was very interesting that I remembered even what I wore and what they wore.
That's why you're a genealogist and they're not.
I suppose. Well, anyway, so then after the most recent meeting, we became very close because I said to her, "Lois, I've written a book about our family and I want to read it to you." So she said, wait, before you do that, I want to know that it's going to help you in some way. I said it would help me very much because it's so important, as I always teach our children, to read something out loud after you write it. It really helps. You can correct it. You can hear it in a different way. So we set up an appointment and I read to her it was 2 summers ago, I believe. I read to her just about every day for a month. And I would read her a few pages at a time, and we would laugh and we would cry, and it was amazing. And she says to me now, "What if I said no? What if I didn't agree to meet with you when you came to Cleveland? Look at what we would have missed." We just can tell each other anything, and we both knew our mothers' families. Our mothers were from a family of 11 children. My grandfather, in his first marriage, had 7 children, and in his second marriage, 4 children. Her mother was the oldest in the first marriage. My mother was the oldest in the second marriage. And the stories are just amazing. So she knew the family when she was younger very well, but then as certain things happened in her life and she went through various tragedies, her brother was killed by a car accident, her husband was killed in a car accident, she remarried, she got divorced. There were all kinds of things going on in her life while she was raising 4 children. And all the moves she made in her life, she moved something like 17 times before marriage because her parents were going through divorce and whatnot. And then she moved again another 10 or so times in her second marriage, around the world because her husband was working, and he was an
Military.
officer in the Army and a surgeon, so he was working in different posts, whatever. So she then lost contact with all these relatives when I just started gaining contact with the ones that were out in California in 1980. We just started traveling out and visiting my aunts and uncles who had settled out there, seeing the ones in Cleveland. So we had relatives here who we, of course, knew very well in all the years, but then we had other aunts and uncles in Cleveland and other aunts and uncles in California. So then we were able to compare and combine stories of who these different relatives were and different stages of their lives and which cousins we mutually knew and which cousins she knew who I didn't really know and cousins that I knew who she didn't know. So and she can make me laugh like no other. So
And
we have a ball.
she was very open about the strong points and what she thought were not as strong points in your book.
Correct. She was very helpful in the book. Very, very helpful. And we learned tremendous amount from one another. And we not only talk about the book and the relatives, but on those daily calls, we'd get involved with daily life things and politics and fashion and
it's continued since the
absolutely.
You finished the book.
So once we finished the book, we just continued this relationship where we talk all the time, and
whenever we're in Cleveland, we visit her.
right. It's just been a great relationship, and we're lucky to have had her come into our lives as strongly as she did.
And tell us a little bit about what you've been going through, how long the writing process was, and now the effort to try to get your book published.
Well, I actually started writing the book right after I appeared on The World of Work in 2009. I came on The World of Work, which I did every year for many years, to speak about genealogy and how I went about finding different relatives and whatnot. And I came home that one day because Shep said he was too busy at work that day to write the introduction and asked me if I could write my own introduction that day. When I wrote the introduction, I said to myself, gee, I could really write a book. And people had been begging me for years to write a book. So in 4 months, I had written a book. I just gave it my all, got everything down into a book in 4 months. Then I took 4 months to edit it. Then I started sending it out to a few people, a few relatives who asked if they could take a look at it and help with editing. Then I worked on it for another 9 years until I got it to the point where I was ready for my, and in between I secured an agent, a literary agent, and I got to the point working with him for about 3 years before finally it was ready. And so I gave it to him and he submitted it to publishers last summer, and he keeps telling me patience. Every time he's checked, it's still in the pile and we're waiting to hear some good news. So hopefully someday soon we'll hear something. In the meantime, I've been editing a couple of other books and had a lot of fun with this as well. So I edited a book which is self-published, but I recommend you go on Amazon and purchase it. It's just an interesting read from an octogenarian about the failures and successes over 8 decades. The name of the book is Just Call Me, quote, Mr. Lucky, an ethical will entwined in an autobiography. And
that's by Chuck Friedman.
It's written by Chuck Friedman, who thanks me in the preface of the book for my help in editing and organizing. And then there's another book that I highly recommend that I didn't edit, but I helped with the genealogy part of it. And it's written by Jocelyn Linder, Linder, and it's called The Family Gene, a mission to turn my deadly inheritance into a hopeful future. Now, Jocelyn will be at book signings this month across the country. Her book just came out in paperback. It came out in hardcover last year by Echo, an imprint of HarperCollins Publishers, and it was in bookstores in March of 2017. And I saw her at one of the book signings, and she's a fascinating person, and you'd be very interested and very entertained if you could get a chance to go to one of the stores where she's having her book signings this month. She's going to be at Diesel Books in Brentwood, California on Thursday, June 21st at 6:30, and our daughter will be there that day. June 21st, 6:30, Diesel Books in Brentwood, California. She's going to be at Words Bookstore in Maplewood, New Jersey on Tuesday, June 26th at 6 p.m., and Shep and I will be there. That's Tuesday, June 26th, 6 p.m. at Words Bookstore in Maplewood. Excuse me. And then she's going to be at the Oblong Bookstore in Rhinebeck, New York on Thursday, June 28th at 6 p.m.
And she was here on WDVR as a guest about 6 to 9 months ago, maybe a little longer than that. Fascinating about her battle with a rare disease. And
the Minneapolis Star-Tribune says, crisply written, deeply informed, an invaluable addition to the literature that dramatizes severe illness and its impact.
Sharon, getting back to your book, the working title is Kitchen Talk. Why do you call it that?
Because I sat around in the kitchen as a child while my paternal aunt, and my mother talked about the family. My aunt came over every weekend, and their big topic of conversation was always the family. And my aunt talked about all the different relatives and all the different branches. We started talking before about my father's family that came over, but then also his uncle came over. Aside from his own father, his uncle came over to Philadelphia. So my grandfather settled in Newark, and we were known as the Newark Mark family. And then the Philly Marks were my father's uncle, and he had 4 daughters. So she would always have stories. My aunt would always have stories. She would keep in touch with everyone. She would keep in touch with them, and then the other cousins who my grandfather settled with in Irvington and Newark, New Jersey, all those, that branch of the family. She would keep in touch with all the different branches. Plus, later on, after the war, was able to connect with the cousins in Russia and make other fascinating connections with them and relatives from that branch who settled in California.
Talking about connections, the way that my listeners can connect with you is through your new website. Tell us about that. It's taken many years of convincing.
To convince me.
But how did it finally
So
happen?
Shep's been telling me for at least 20 years that I should blog, and I never gave into it. But this year, our children got involved, and our son Judd was the webmaster. He made up the website, and our children chipped in and gave it to me for a present. And it's SharonMarkCohen.com. So Sharon Mark Cohen as all one word, no dots or anything. SharonMarkCohen.com. You put that in your search engine, and you come up with my website, which I'm starting to blog on. Matter of fact, today I put a little blog on there just to hope to get started with this.
And who's your
Hope to pick up momentum and do it.
And who's your projected audience, and what type of topics do you have on there now?
Anybody who's interested in genealogy, family histories, will love to blog along.
We've met so many people, but one of the two of the fascinating people are those that we've met down in Florida, who we never knew until you did your family research. And they're actually my cousins, but you've become very close with them, Fran and Nita.
Right.
Tell us about them.
Well, we have a great time. I mean, every year we go down for a conference and we take some time to go visit these cousins. Now, they're much older than we are, and they're fascinating. They're interesting. They've known members of the family, so we could piece together how they're related and different parts of the family. So one I was able to write a story about just recently, and part of my thing is that everybody deserves a legacy. So I love writing about different members of the family. The relative I wrote about this time was Fran. I've also written a story about Lois that was published, but this time I wrote a story about Fran, and they've both been published in the Jewish Link, which is a newspaper in New Jersey where I'm a contributing writer. So they have the Family Link section on the third Thursday in the Jewish Link, and I've had some of these stories in, and they're all now on my website, so you can go to the articles page on my website and click on any of these stories and read about these fascinating people and the ways we connected and the people that we're connected with. So Fran's father, who was not the relative, her mother was the relative, but her father made the marriage connection for one of Shep's aunts, and she said that the wedding was on their property in Groveton, Virginia, and she gave me the year, and she even still uses the tablecloth that was used that day for the reception that she helped her father put on the table. So she solved the mystery of when Shep's aunt married and where. And she told me so many stories about her, and she taught her how to bake. And what a wonderful baker she was,
So
which
now-
we knew from the family history that she would bake apple pies every week with her mother to send home with the married children.
So not only is it a legacy of Fran, but it's a legacy of my aunt
Anne, who never had children. She married but didn't have children. She was older when she married. And now Aunt Anne was in the paper. Her picture was in the paper after all these years. I love doing things like that.
And how about Nita?
And Nita, we get together with every year, and her father was a cousin to my mother-in-law, a first cousin to my mother-in-law. So my mother-in-law knew that he existed. I mean, she had met him probably very few times when she was little, but they lived in New York. But there's a whole connection there, and all the fascinating stories that Nita has to tell about her father and just fighting his way to go to grammar school, kids beating up different gangs and everything back then in New York and Brooklyn, and how she used to go visit her grandparents every Sunday, and that was my mother-in-law's uncle. So, and I have pictures of her great-grandmother. So it's all fascinating how everybody's interconnected, and I have all these pictures, and she has some old pictures, and we're able to piece together all kinds of other members of the family through all these pictures and all the times that we get together and just talk.
And talking about getting together, is there any particular time that it's best to try to gather family history from? Any events or?
Yeah, it's always better, first of all, if somebody's going to be videotaped, they want to be dressed and ready to be in front of a camera. But if you're just going to audio tape, it's not as difficult, but just pick a time when people are in the mood to talk about family, generally when you're at a gathering, like when we were at the graduation party last weekend, or when we had the weekend of our son's wedding. That was also fascinating. When we came back from the wedding, one of my first cousins who I hadn't seen since 2003, who I grew up very close, like one family we grew up, and he came to the wedding from Colorado with his wife. And when he went back, I called him up and I said, I have to read you the first 3 chapters of my book. So much of it was about his parents and our mutual aunt who used to come and do the kitchen talk. So it was so fascinating. And he said to me, when I read it to him, he said, what we had was a beautiful thing. And I said, I know. That's why it can't be lost. That's why I had to write it into a book. And I wrote another one of the articles I had published was after our son's wedding, my cousin, his sister, who came from Rochester for the wedding, as a wedding gift, she gave our son and his bride a bowl and a mug, or bowls and mugs, as part of a gift that replicated the bowl and mug that my uncle, who my son was named for, ate his meals out of and had his coffee from during the Passover holiday. And I wrote a whole story about that. And things like that are just traditions and things, legacies for the family you just don't want to lose. So I had my uncle's wedding picture in and my son's wedding picture in the same article published in the newspaper. So it's just a great way to keep the legacy going, keep it alive.
We've talked about this in past appearances for you on the World of Work, but how about the letters that your Aunt Fanny had, which you found in the tin?
She had over 125 letters from our ancestors in Ukraine, and they were all the way from way back to my great-grandfather. And I had a cousin in California whose husband was able to translate them, and he sent me typed copies of every translations of all those 125 letters. And then I went about finding all the different relatives. My grandmother was from a family of 6, and I found the other 5 descendants of the other 5 relatives who I'm very, very close with now. And then on my grandfather's side, there were 7, and I have a relationship with 5 branches. There are 2 branches that I never found. The oldest sister and oldest brother of my grandfather, I never found any of those descendants. But it's possible that with the Holocaust and the wars and everything, that no one survived from those families. But every other family, I've found some relatives.
You've been very successful in gathering information and getting responses from relatives. Is there any trick, or you just have the knack of connecting with people?
Just part of it is just talking, just being willing to ask questions. For example, last Sunday when that couple said, "Oh, we're from St. Louis," if I didn't mention the name of the families that we have out there, we wouldn't know that we were connected. But it's just a matter of keeping the conversation going, not being afraid to throw out names, to throw out places, and talk about different people and different things. And it's just, even when we were at the wedding in Savannah, one of the younger cousins, who's only in her 20s, I went over to her and I said, "You had dinner in California with my daughter." Another cousin introduced them out in California. So all these connections, now she understands better how she's related to our daughter, who she went and had dinner with out in California.
You said that the conversation should never end. Unfortunately, this conversation is going to end in about 2 minutes. Any closing thoughts that you want to leave my listeners with?
Just go to my website, SharonMarkCohen.com, read some of my articles, and let me know what you think, and blog with me.
And what are they going to blog about?
Family. Talk to me, ask me questions, suggest things that you want me to discuss.
How about one thing? We have a little bit more time. You have a whole history of videos that you've taken of relatives. Why'd you take them?
Certainly, that's very important. This way, you have all the information down, and you can go back and look at it at any time and record what you have. You can also type up some of the recordings and publish stories about them. And one way to get your writing going is to keep writing and keep getting published.
Okay, at that, we're going to have to get going. Good luck on your continued quest to get your book published.
Thank you very much.
And what are your plans after that?
We'll see what the next book will be.
Well, Sharon Mark Cohen, my wife of 43 years, happy anniversary. Thank you for joining us on the World of Work today. It's been a pleasure to have you on again. And we missed a few years, but now you're back. The newsletter is back. You're back. Things are in the swing again.
Thank you. Happy anniversary to you. And I look forward to my next appearance on the World of Work.
Thank you very much. Until next time, this is the World of Work. I'm your host, Shep Cohen.